This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benerofe, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. John Bailey, White Plains Week, the City News Roundup Show. And good evening to all you people trying to make a decision out there. It's time to make up your mind. And I'm with Jim Benerofe, the Dean of the White Plains School of Journalism, and, of course, Peter Katz, the anchor for all seasons on your right, who lends his dulcet tones to our opening every week. So.
Actually, I'm on your right and everyone else is left if you're looking at the screen.
Right, but it's on my right and on my left.
You see,
Jim
that's
Benerofe.
because in the news business you have to learn how to be on the right and the left at the same time. That way you don't offend
Well, they're
anyone.
really failing at that these days. Right, so at any rate, headlines, please.
And here are the headlines. Contractor cuts gas line on rail side. Common Council revisits old issues on French-American School of New York campus project on Ridgeway. 3 opponents harden position. Latimer assails Astorino and County Executive debates on airport taxes, contributors being awarded projects. Calls for investigation. Astorino calls on Letterman to pay back taxes, parking tickets in Yonkers. Latest League of Women Voters Forum shows attending crowd feels it's better off than it was 7 years ago. We will have another troubling edition of Trump the President with Peter Katz. Governor Cuomo reports on Puerto Rico. White Plains School Superintendent Dr. Joseph Ricca listens to issues in First Community Forum. The White Plains Library Foundation introduces the hub at its annual gala to open officially in December. Bar Taco closed for evidence of hepatitis A by county is thoroughly cleaned and open again. 4 customers infected. The fabulous fat man from New Orleans, Fats Domino, dies at 89 years of age. The man who sang Blueberry Hill, whose big piano sound broke the color barrier in pop music, opened the door for Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Lloyd Price.
Thank you, Jim, and we'll go right to the White Plains Week newsreel march of time, and that was the scene last week, just before we did last week's show, down on Railside Avenue, where the entire neighborhood was infused with the smell of gas, and it was corded off for a while. We don't know how long it took them to fix it, but there are the Con Ed crews working on fixing up the gas leak, which was ruptured when a contractor struck it. And it was always my impression that when you were constructing, you had to call ahead.
You're supposed to coordinate. You're supposed to be aware of where there are gas lines, where there may be buried electrical lines, sewer lines, water lines, and so forth. And sometimes they're aware and sometimes they're not. But accidents do happen from time to time.
Yes, but it's extremely dangerous.
Not the first time that a gas line has been hacked open by
ruptured
construction equipment.
Ruptured. I always like that word, ruptured.
But Con Edison is very prompt when they're notified of a gas leak, because we all know the hazards. I mean,
Well,
gas, when it
absolutely.
mixes in the right proportion with air, can become explosive.
Right. And speaking of explosions, there was one on Monday night. We had a FASNY meeting. And the explosion, of course, started very quietly enough. It was just called the end of last week.
Now, this was a special council meeting.
Yes, that's right, Monday evening. And it began with the Commissioner of Planning, Chris Gomez, next up, going over the timeline since 2015 of all the meetings they have had and decisions. And this, of course, got the meeting off to a really rousing electric start.
Now, they had about a 200-page document in the backup material on this.
Yes.
There was no action taken. There were no votes. It was billed as a meeting at which there would be no action on the French-American school. So
Yes.
what did they really do here?
Well, they had some comments from the Common Council. Next slide. And Dennis Crowlin began the comments with concern about enforcing the traffic on Mamaroneck Avenue and Ridgeway and checking the traffic counts and who would be responsible for monitoring that. I mean, he wanted the police to monitor it. And Ms. Lacuna, the councilwoman Lacuna, came up with a thought that the FASNY should be forced to stay within their present number of students that are in the plan, because she says that it is not mandatory. That's what it says now. And then Nadine Hunt Robinson surprised everybody by being very concerned about the environment and said that there should be no development on Parcel A other than what is allowed for 50 years. What did you think about that?
She said, we're developing Parcel A.
Yeah.
She said C, D, and whatever
okay.
the other, or could not have development for 50 years, no buildings.
What that seems to say is that would be willing to vote in favor of the FASNY project if there were long-term restrictions on it. Now,
that's an interesting
one way they could do that would be to put in a deed restriction.
Could be, but we'll see what happens. We do not know whether we'll vote on this on the 6th before election, which seems very unlikely, and when it would be, the resolution would finally be hammered out to be put forth. So, next we go to the county race, and it was really exciting this week because we had the first of the debates between Mr. Astorino
for County Executive.
Yes, and Mr. Latimer, State Senator Latimer, and that was in New Rochelle. It was not televised extensively, and it was limited attendance and really hard to get to down there. But be that as it may, there was Senator Latimer made a few points that were registered.
Well,
Peter.
you know, John, one of the major issues brought up by Latimer against Astorino in the campaign is the effort to privatize the Westchester County Airport through a 40-year lease deal. Now, Latimer alleges that there's a tie-in between the awarding of contracts for work at the airport and contributions to the Astorino campaign made by companies which received those contracts. Latimer held a news conference in downtown White Plains on Wednesday.
In the case of the Westchester County Airport, which is particularly egregious but not limited to the airport, we've identified in our research that there are $55.7 million worth of county contracts that have been given to 28 firms. Those firms have contributed over $200,000 to the Astorino campaign, and that's a significant number of dollars. Keep in mind that the max donation that any entity can give is slightly under $30,000. So when you're talking about $200,000, you're talking about 6 times a maximum number. That particular issue is part of a much larger narrative, and the larger narrative is that companies that have received over $3.5 billion of county contracts have in turn contributed $1.6 million to the Astorino campaign. Westchester County Board of Legislators, to my understanding, has sent a letter to the FAA outlining some of their concerns about these things. So we're looking for an investigation. If the investigation comes back with no linkage, then there's no linkage. But an investigation is warranted, we think, and that's what we're calling for today.
Now, one other thing that came out at that news conference was that Latimer's organization has found out that Robert Mercer, who is a billionaire hedge fund operator and a alt-right supporter, apparently has donated $1 million to the Astorino campaign to be used in a last-minute push here.
A lot of TV.
Mercer was a prime funder of the Donald Trump presidential campaign, also was a prime funder of Breitbart, the alt-right news site run by Steve Bannon, who was in the White House with President Trump and who now is out of the White House but says that he is President Trump's wingman. Mm-hmm. And he says he is engaged in a war against the Republican Party establishment. Mm-hmm. So the campaign for Westchester County Executive now is being
Trumpicized.
somewhat.
That's right. Trump-sized.
As they go back and forth.
That sounds like something you would buy at McDonald's, Trump-size. Right. Yeah. But now, Governor Andrew Cuomo departed New York and flew to Puerto Rico, and here is a Puerto Rico report.
Actually, it was a 24-hour, one-day visit, round trip to Puerto Rico. Second time that Cuomo has done this, to see what can be done to have New York help out in the recovery from the hurricane. Now, Governor Cuomo met with reporters last night at Kennedy Airport after they got back from Puerto Rico. Now, through the Empire State Clean Water Fund, he announced that New York is pledging $1 million to support the purchase of water filtration systems for households and communities that continue to lack clean water in Puerto Rico. Additionally, a 28-member tactical power restoration team is going to be assisting in restoring electrical power. And they're sending down 5 specialized accountants who will be assigned to helping the Puerto Rican people fill out FEMA paperwork. Delta Airlines donated the flight, and on that airplane they carried 27,000 bottles of water. To date, New York State has delivered more than 1 million bottles of water and millions of pounds of other supplies through the Empire State Relief and Recovery Act and key partners, including United Parcel Service and UNICEF. Here's a bit of what Cuomo said last night at JFK.
The fact that the recovery has been as slow as it is in Puerto Rico, in my opinion, they deserve much better, and we should have made more progress by now. 36 days, and you still don't have power to 80% of the island is incredible. We went through Hurricane Sandy, if you remember, on Long Island, and 3-4 days without power was like a lifetime. This has been now 36 days without power. If you have to wonder, if you had a state in the United States that went 36 days without power, what kind of reaction you would have. It would be on the TV news every night. People would be outraged. And people tend to forget that Puerto Ricans are Americans, and they really did deserve a better response than they're getting. I told the governor and the officials in Puerto Rico, the Army Corps of Engineers is now heading up the power recovery effort with the Power Authority of Puerto Rico. New York utilities would send down hundreds of crews and we would do that within days from our utility companies if the Army Corps of Engineers wanted that assistance under what's called the mutual aid program. But there's no excuse for the delay, in my opinion. You're going to have people who die as a result of this storm even 30, 36 days later. And that's not acceptable, not today. We're better than that, and we have done better than that.
Right.
He
Absolutely.
blasted the Army Corps of Engineers for not asking for help.
No. They need a lot of help.
Now,
They don't know what they're doing.
keep in mind that President Trump last week rated his response, rated himself with a 10 out of 10 score for the response in Puerto Rico. The facts really dispute that.
That's right. And of course, now it's the segment you always wait for every week. Trump, the president.
Well, Trump was back in lying mode on Wednesday when he met with reporters near the South Lawn of the White House. When asked about the speech given by Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake, in which Flake blasted Trump and the nationalists and white supremacists he surrounded himself with, Trump told a tall tale about not knowing Flake. Then he provided alternative facts about his college education, most of which was at Fordham, not at an Ivy League school. Then he insisted he was respectful toward the widow of Green Beret LaDavid Johnson, one of the 4 killed in Niger, when she and others, including a congresswoman who were with her, heard the rather callous things that Trump said in a phone call, which forced the widow to start crying. So listen.
Long before he ever knew me, during the campaign, even before the campaign, he came out with his horrible book, and I said, who is this guy? In fact, I remembered the first time I saw him on television, I had not really been, nobody knew me in terms of politics, but the first time I saw him on television, I said, I assume he's a Democrat. Is he a Democrat? They said, he's a Republican. I said, that's impossible. So,
should you be more civil as a leader of this country?
well, I think the press makes me more uncivil than I am. You know, people don't understand. I went to an Ivy League college. I was a nice student. I did very well. I'm a very intelligent person. The fact is, I really believe, I think the press creates a different image of Donald Trump than the real. I can only say this: I was really nice to her. I respect her. I respect her family. I certainly respect LaDavid, who I, by the way, called LaDavid right from the beginning. Just so you understand, they put a chart in front. LaDavid, it says LaDavid Johnson. So I called right from the beginning. There's no hesitation. One of the great memories of all time. There was no hesitation. I think she's a fantastic woman. I was extremely nice to her, extremely respectful.
How about that?
Why do you have to have a great memory if they put a chart right in front of you that has the name on it? All you have to do is be able to read.
It's true.
Anyway, President Trump announced his plan to deal with the country's opioid crisis. That was yesterday. About 175 people die every day from opioid overdoses, including heroin and prescription drugs here in the U.S. Imagine what an outcry there would be if every day an airplane carrying 175 people crashed and burned. So in a ceremony and speech at the White House, Trump declared a public health emergency. How much money did he announce would be spent to begin dramatic action to deal with the public health emergency? Take a guess. How much? None. And what actions did he announce? None, except an advertising campaign. And what would be advertised? Well, warnings not to overdose on opioids.
Yes, or
Maybe.
how about don't just say no?
Well, maybe our tax
Stuck the
dollars
words
will
out
pay
of my
for
mouth.
ads that also happen to advertise Donald Trump. Remember Nancy Reagan? Just say no.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you remember how well that worked, right? Former House Speaker John Boehner says that and this is his word, the knuckleheads are now running things in Washington. That's John Boehner speaking.
Knucklehead Smith, right?
Trump appointed an election fraud commission to try to prove his claim that 3 million fraudulent votes were cast in the election, and that's the reason that Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump did. Well, some members of that commission and members of Congress are now calling for an investigation of the fraud commission. To find out what a few members of the commission, such as Vice President Pence, are doing behind the backs of other commission members. There have only been 2 regular meetings of the commission. A lot of the behind-the-scenes activity has gone undisclosed. Remember, the commission has been trying to compile a master list of all registered voters in the country, including Social Security numbers, military status, party affiliation, and a lot of other personal information. A YouGov poll says 87% of Americans expect Trump not to tell the truth. Among Republicans, it's only 67%.
Brilliant.
A Fox News poll, get this, Fox News poll puts Trump's approval rating at 38%. General John Kelly still has not apologized for lying during a White House press conference last week about Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. The full video of her speech at a dedication of an FBI building shows without any doubt that what Kelly said, she said, and did never happened. Billionaire environmentalist Tom Steyer from California is spending $10 million on a television ad campaign to generate support for impeaching Trump. He calls upon Americans to sign a petition demanding that Congress begin impeachment proceedings, saying Trump is dangerous, incompetent, unqualified, immature, and a threat to everyone because he has access to nuclear weapons. Steyer has established a website, needtoimpeach.com. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he'll be a point man in organizing opposition to Trump wingman Steve Bannon, as Bannon attempts to destroy the Republican Party as a mainstream fixture of the U.S. FEMA has refused to release its hurricane relief plan for Puerto Rico. No kidding. The news organization ProPublica filed a Freedom of Information Act request to try to get that. FEMA said, no way, we're keeping it secret.
Well, they're not doing one. That's what the problem is.
Congress has passed a $4 trillion budget bill resolution which allows the Republican plan for tax reform to be treated as a reconciliation measure, meaning only 51 votes will be needed in the Senate to pass it, not the usual 60 votes. Based on what we now know, 80% of the tax cuts would go to the richest people and corporations. Taxes on the poor and middle class would go up. The portion of your income now taxed at 10% would be taxed at 12%. The portion now taxed at 15% would be taxed at 25%. And if you're rich, the portion now taxed at 39% would be taxed at 35%.
Oh,
and your corporation's tax would be cut in half, down to 15%. Taxes to fund Medicare, yes, Medicare, would be slashed, stripping senior citizens of their health care. The deduction for state and local taxes, something that's vital in high state tax states like New York, would be eliminated. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer traveled to Selkirk, just outside of Albany, on Wednesday in an effort to put pressure on the Republicans who represent New York State to join the fight to keep state and local tax deductions.
Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or independent, there's a pretty good chance you're worried about how this plan would affect you, our neighborhoods, our businesses, and there's good reason to worry. Because when it comes to protecting the future of critical tax deductions, state and local tax deductions, Congress has placed a bullseye on New York State. You don't have to be a partisan nose to smell a rat, but I tell you, this plan stinks. We are calling on every single member of the New York congressional delegation to vote against a tax plan that hurts the state and local deduction, which New York so depends on. We are asking them to vote against any bill that contains it.
Enough?
It's never enough. Never enough, is it? Now, school district got back down to business this week. Dr. Joseph Ricca, the new superintendent, held the first community budget forum a good 3 months early, which is quite nice. And he was asking for ideas from parents on their feelings about the school district. 25 persons attended, about 16 of them actual parents, and these are some of their ideas. Stepped up services for English learners in WPHS. They slipped through the cracks, one parent said. They should have translators at school meetings. 8th graders, writing skills, not as good as they used to be. 3 parents said that, and they felt this high school has to give more work composition skills. And keep and attract high-achieving students, add advanced courses, add courses in life skills, trades for those not going to college, eliminate bus fees to WPHS, that's a policy at the district, and more field trips, permanent concession at Laux. I don't think those are really high priorities, but that's just my opinion. But anyway, the budget is actually, we're getting started early when they can incorporate such ideas into the budget. And now, Jim, the Hub was celebrated at the Library Gala last week, and why don't you tell us a little bit about it while we go through the slides.
Well, I don't know what the exact attendance was, but I believe it was around 100, 150, 160, something like that. The featured guest was Sloane Crosley, who is an author that's a graduate of White Plains High School. And she was very, very entertaining. She has a terrific sense of humor.
And got a proclamation
Got
from
a proclamation
the
from the
Ben
county.
Boykin there. Right.
She read a piece from a new book that's forthcoming, and it was quite entertaining. And
she announced the movie deal.
yeah, well, she said she wasn't. She has the book that she had there that we all got. Is called The Clasp. And she said that they're working on getting a movie deal on it, but she wasn't guaranteeing that it would go through.
Well, they've optioned it.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, a great man at the piano died this week. That was the first record of Fats Domino's that I bought, and it was the first 45 RPM I ever bought. And that was back in 1956, and Fats Domino was absolutely a force. And when he came on the radio, he made you happy. And the Times gave him a full-page book.
There was a certain sound to it, a certain sound which people had not heard before.
The boogie-woogie combination, deep bass piano, and it just engaged you. Piano was a good part of the Chuck Berry records and a good part of the Lloyd Price records, and Fats was instrumental in writing riffs.
Well, you know,
for
one thing about people like Fats Domino, they did have good, long careers. I mean, the music established a following early on, and that following continued, continues today.
And he had a contract that gave him royalties on his records. Very smart man. Well, that's it for White Plains Week tonight. John Bailey, Jim Benerofe, Peter Katz. Good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week. News and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.